Hello and welcome to BAL Tiling and Facebook Live. My name's Dave Rowley and I'm the Training and Technical Manager for BAL. Also today we've actually got in the room, we've got Phil Jenkins, who's the PR and Contents Manager, who's going to be dealing with the cameras today and also asking questions shortly. Also we have been supported by David Hilton, who's the Technical Support Manager for the Midlands, and he'll be mixing up the products as we go through today's session. Now, what is today's session? Well, fantastic, excellent news, because now we have our own BAL external systems. It's that new that today we're still in plain packaging. So the fact is we'll be launching the actual product as from Monday the 27th of September, so orders will be taking place from there. Within the range itself, we're going to be covering two types of systems today. One is actually the traditional systems where we've been used to tiling onto solid backgrounds such as concrete, and the use of leathery compounds would be required to provide a flat surface to aid in fixing with tile discs. But what's actually new is now we have a system for you guys that literally all you need to do, instead of putting a concrete base down, you can put MOT down and literally physically use the bedding mortar with a slurry coat straight on and fix porcelain 20 mil thick, or as long as they support it. So it doesn't have to be just porcelain as well. With regards to the bedding mortar, the BAL bedding mortar itself, it's pre-blended, and you'll probably see in the shot here we've actually got a free action drill or mixer here, force action mixer. That is really the type of mixer we would tend to recommend. Generally 3-4 mixers, which is what we normally see on building sites, the material will ball up and you won't get consistency in the mix itself. But the useful with this system is you can mix multiple bags and physically lay the tiles in one go. So before we actually get started, thank you very much for taking part in listening. What I'd like you to do is just during the course of this session, if you can actually on the comments box, put a hi, but also put a question as well, and we can obviously answer them during the course of the session. But also from a bundle we actually as far as an offer, today we've actually got on a link that will be shortly coming up on the chat box on Facebook itself. The link will go and click on there and actually register your details, and a project, an external project that you're going to do, put in that project, and one lucky person will receive all the materials for that project itself. So take part in that as well. So without further ado, what I'd like to do now is actually then cover off the first product. So the first part of this session is all about the traditional manner. We're so used to fixing tiles externally, but also what we have within the BAL range is a product called BAL Levelout. This is actually a single part leathery compound that you can literally apply directly onto the actual concrete base. But remember, preparation is also vital. So make sure you either steam clean, jet wash, make sure there's no latents, remove any weak layers, put adhesion, and literally the material can go straight on there. If the concrete itself is actually quite porous, what you can do is actually dampen down the actual concrete first, but do make sure you don't fall with water over the surface. So just dampen down, just take some of that absorbency out first. With the compound itself, because it's single part, all you need is 5.25 litres of water. You can actually, and you may be asking yourself, this is leather compound. What about you go to slight 4, which is what you need for external tiling? You can actually alter the water ratio slightly. You can go down to 5 litres, and that will actually help to actually give a smooth material, but obviously the material won't fall, obviously, follow the form of the floor itself. So from 5 to 5.25 litres of water, mix up the material with a paddle mixer, obviously not by hand, and make sure the material is actually fully mixed, and there's no lumps there, fully consistent throughout the mix. And literally then, all you do is pour the material onto the actual surface itself. All you need to use is literally a floating trowel, Or for larger areas, you can use a long handle tool as far as a float, and obviously a plank. Now this can also be pumped as well, so keep in mind if you're doing very big areas, the material is quite capable to be pumped as well. Right. Thank you very much, David. So it's pumpable, it's self-smoothing like you typically use with leather compounds. It's only designed for external use. You can go from 2 mil up to 20 mil, and the material itself, you can literally walk on it after 3 hours and start the commencing of the tiling. And you tile in the traditional manner using products like BAL Portable 1, ideal for your big porcelain. Now, also with this particular system, where you've got a concrete base that you've levelled out, or you can actually use any type of ceramic and porcelain tiles as long as they're suited for external use, and you can use them from 10 mil and upwards. So, if you'd like to see how the material actually works, so this has actually got a pot life of 30 minutes, yeah. And literally, you see there, the material you can float out. Depending on the water, you can actually adjust it. And this is where I go quiet, because it's quite therapeutic. Smooth it out over the surface. As I said before, if the concrete is quite porous, you don't prime it, you just dampen it down. Now, coverage-wise with this, you're looking at, depending obviously thickness-wise, but you're probably looking around about sort of 3-4 square metres at final thickness, and obviously that will increase greater than that. So you're around about 8 mil when you start obviously reducing that down. But you've got to put a minimum of 2 mil, and you can go anything obviously up to 20. Once the material has actually been applied, with obviously other BAL leather compounds within the range, we've always stated that spike rollers is not recommended because it's got fibres in. This has obviously got fibres in, so you can agitate the actual surface to help remove any lumps. But there are pockets there on the surface. And it's simple as that. The material itself, 3 hours, you can literally start tying onto it, and literally then start to prepare on top with tile adhesive, such as Portable 1, Rowley Flex 1, or even Flex 1.
Dave, sorry, yeah. Thanks for that, Dave. Just remember, guys, to say say hi on the comments below, and you'll win a goodie bag.
Yeah, as Phil just said, if we're obviously looking at saying hi, you get getting the actual bags, the sample lucky bags, but also please ask questions as well to receive that goodie bag. So that's the sort of traditional manner as far as how you fix tiles currently. Now, what I want to really push on now is actually the unique differences. Tiling outside we've been doing for many years, but we've always had to recommend the use of a concrete base. And as we all know, not everybody has actually got concrete bases outside for these type of finishes. So what tends to happen is you tend to put a type 1 aggregate onto the actual floor. What you need to do with these type 1 aggregates is you need to actually apply a minimum of 100 mil thickness. It can be greater than that, but obviously be mindful not to go above your damp course membrane, a damp course with regards to up against the buildings. And also you need to, when you put this down, try to get the fall at the same time. So wherever your fall is going to go, try to make that up with the actual type 1 itself. Once you've actually put the type 1 into place, you need to whack and plate that down. Now, that doesn't mean use a shovel and just hit the actual top surface here. You need to ensure this is actually well compressed in place before you put your finishes on top. So, whack and plate over the actual type 1, and then once you've actually done that, now depending on how it's being stored and so on, it might be a good idea is to actually dampen over the actual type 1 first before we start to use these systems, because it's quite porous. The next stage of this session is we're going to use a priming slurry coat from BAL, and you apply that onto the type 1 first at a minimum of 1 to 2 mil. Just over the actual surface, you can go obviously 2 to 3 as well. So what you do now is you mix the actual material. The actual priming slurry coat or priming bond is literally pre-mixed. You don't add anything else barring water. You just put 6.4 litres of water, and that actually provides you then a very fluid slurry mix that you can then brush onto the actual type 1 MOT, and it also you can brush it or you can roll it, depending obviously how big the actual type 1 actually is. So once it's batted, 6.4 litres. The other good thing, it comes in a 20 kilo bag. It will do at a 1 to 2, at a 2 mil thickness, it will actually do 8 square meters. Also, the material, once it's mixed up, you wouldn't mix part bags of this, guys. You mix the whole bag. You've actually got an hour pot life. So you've got ample time to actually apply over large areas. The important bit with any slurry bond system, and particularly here, is we actually recommend, once you've actually applied the slurry bond onto the actual MOT, but it also could be used onto concrete as well. So even though we've just talked about the use of level out as a leveling compound, you can actually use the system I'm going to be demonstrating to you now, also on concrete. So if you have got a concrete base that hasn't got a fall there, you can use this bedding mortar system with the priming slurry bond and actually create the falls on top of the actual concrete itself. The material itself, literally, once the actual MOT is compacted, you tip the slurry onto the area, and using a brush, you literally apply that over the actual surface. Now, what you would normally do before you obviously start mixing up the bedding mortar is you literally set out your rails. Now, today obviously all I'm doing is applying this into a frame, but you would normally, what you would do is first set your rails and your falls on the floor itself. Ensure that you actually cover the area like so. And this material itself is also the same material you will use to actually bond the porcelain on top of the bedding mortar itself. The bedding mortar is a pre-blended system where you have the aggregate, sand, cement, but also what's important with this, it's actually also a rapid drying system. This is a rapid drying system which literally, when used, you actually physically got 12 hours and you can walk on it, grout it up. The material itself has got an hour pot life, so you can mix multiple bags, pour it over the floor on top of the wet priming slurry bond, compact it down, and you're creating actually your background, your screed, but also the ability to actually fix your porcelain directly in. What's also a benefit is this would be used with systems where you're using porcelain, in particular 20 mil, or self-supported systems. And keep that in mind as far as it doesn't have to be 20 mil porcelain, it could be any material that is self-supported that you would use onto self-supported systems. And that could be stone as well as obviously pavers, should I say. Yes, sir, Phil.
I've got a question. It's what is the difference between this line priming slurry bond and this one you mix up with, say, SBR or something?
The thing is, when you're looking at with it, if you look at, you might be thinking, well, we use cement systems already, we use SBRs already. The difference is with these type of systems is everything's pre-blended. So by just putting the right amount of water in, you're actually getting consistency from mix to mix. Because you're not going to mix everything for the whole job in one mix. You're going to do multiple mixes throughout the whole job. So think about it. If you're using an SBR and you're physically putting different amounts in, that SBR might not be the same in each mix that you actually do. So you'll get inconsistency. And these are obviously risk factors when it comes to external and systems. And more importantly, with anything external, you've got to consider we're not just tiling indoors. Outside, you've got all the weather conditions, all the extreme conditions there. It's even more critical that that proportion is actually correct. So by having a priming slurry bond pre-blended with the right amount of water, you literally got consistency right the way through from mix to mix. So what we've got here, we've actually, David has very kindly actually mixed the material up, so thank you very much for that. And literally, apply the material over the wet priming slurry bond. Important, it must remain wet. You must not let it dry out. If you do, then you literally have to remove that and just reapply another wet amount over the top. Now, with any type of screed material, it's also very important that you compact that down first. Use a rail bar, and literally what you do now what some people do is they actually apply the material slightly over the rails that you put down and then actually physically use roll it down, but also what we do is then compact that down with the actual force itself.
Dave, is there any hard and fast rule about using the screeding bar, or can you just compact it down with, say, a float or something? I mean,
it's long, at the end of the day, everyone's got different skill levels as far as what they prefer to use. I'm not here to obviously say to you, you've got to do this method. The important bit here is that the material is compacted down by every method you want to use. So if you find another way that you prefer to use, please do so.
I've got a question from our colleague Paul, Crozier in Ireland. Dave, he's asking about, could you use level out on top of the bedding mortar needed to get the correct level?
Well, the thing is, if you put your rails down in the first instance, you provided the levels and the falls that you want. You wouldn't use any of the level out on this particular system. The idea is you form your falls with the actual bedding mortar, and then what you literally then do is you actually want to put the porcelain straight in. The other good thing is because it's a mortar bed, if there's any difference in thicknesses with the porcelain, you bed it down, you can knock it into place.
Good question though, Paul.
Yeah, just.
What are you doing here then, Dave?
So what I'm actually doing now is using a wooden float or a honeycomb type of plastic float, which is what I've got here. You literally, what you're doing is actually the surface itself, you're smoothing it out, which is typically what you do for rendering and screening generally. You wouldn't use a metal float on this, because what will happen is it will draw the water to the surface, and then what will happen is then the material itself will start pulling away. This provides a flat, dry finish, ready for your slurry to go on. That's literally as simple as that. So where you would normally have to provide your forms with the background itself, you're doing this all in one go. Remember, the original background was type 1, no concrete. This actually provides your mechanism for installing porcelain or any self-supporting material. Provides you your surface. Like so. Now the material itself, if you're going on to type 1, you need a minimum of 25mm thickness on top, so that's the good thing about it. Make sure your type 1 is actually to the height that you're looking at, allowed for your 20mm porcelain on top. If you want, you can use this 25mm onto MOT, and anything up to 100mm. If you're going onto a concrete base where you want to create a fall yourself, where you can't use level out because it's not, you haven't got the falls there, you only need a minimum of 10mm. You still use the slurry bond on top of the concrete first, but as again, you put the actual bedding mortar over the slurry bond, 25mm for MOT, minimum of 10mm for concrete, and anything up to 100mm in depth.
Got a question from Chris Scott, who's asked, hi guys, how does this stuff fare out against cracks?
Well, if you're looking at MOT, you're actually, there's not going to be any cracks there anyway. Are you talking?
I think, I'm assuming he's talking about concrete.
If it's concrete, I mean, obviously there's cracks there. You need to investigate why those cracks are there. If it's where there's movement, then you would obviously have to follow that through the actual finish itself. But with MOT, you're actually just providing a sturdy surface, which is why you need to compact the MOT down first, but then apply a minimum amount. That's the beauty of this. You don't have to put great thicknesses of sand cement, which is what you typically do with normal traditional sand cement. This only needs a minimum of 10mm on concrete or a minimum of 25mm on MOT, so you're not using massive amounts of material to form your bedding mortar and install the tiles. So this is actually now can be left, but what you do is you need to apply the slurry coat on top of that within an hour. And the slurry coat itself is also an hour, so what you mix up for underneath, you can actually also use above. Now, when you apply this, all you need to do, obviously follow your setup point, of course, but literally, material then can be troweled over the surface. Now you'll probably notice I'm only using a 6mm notch trowel here. Using this type of trowel, you only need to actually apply a minimum of 2 to 3mm there. Don't go to the extreme of putting using a 10mm notch. You can use all these other elements of applying this, but I find easier to use a trowel, because that way then you keep an even amount over the entire area. It doesn't pull the actual mortar away because you've actually used a wooden float previously. And you literally, all you then do is apply the porcelain to it. Now, with regards to the porcelain, so the porcelain itself, keep in mind, with any type of materials, as you do with tiling, if there's actually a smooth back, which this one is, you can use just a normal brush or a roller, or you can actually use the flat side of your trowel, just apply a very thin layer on the back, about 1 mil to 2, but generally just want to wet the back and place that straight into the priming slurry bond that you've just applied to the bedding mortar. If, on the other hand, which I've got one here, which you may not actually see, it's clear, but if you look at this one here, it's quite got a deep key on the back. If this is actually the case, I wouldn't use a brush, I would actually use the flat side of your trowel and actually float the whole back so you ensure that you cover the entire area itself. So all you need to do, whichever method you want to use, because it's not literally you've got to use it in this sort of way, you've got multiple applications, brush, roller or trowel, but the material itself, apply to the back of the porcelain itself.
Got a question from Paul again in Ireland. What would happen if you can't slurry bond on top in an hour?
Well, the material itself is designed to actually dry as a one system. So
wet on wet.
It's got to be wet on wet. So you just be mindful about what you're actually doing. If you're obviously coming up to lunchtime, just make sure you finish that mix first of all. Because you've got an hour, to be honest with you, you're looking at 8 square metres. That's the slurry bond itself. Keep in mind you're going to be doing underneath and above. Once, if you're ruling out the mortar of the area, generally speaking, you wouldn't normally do this on your own. You'd have maybe one other person. So if one person's actually putting the mortar down, one person's actually laying the slurry and jumping in front, putting the slurry on the floor. So it's quite simple and working as a team. But what you do then is literally place the actual porcelain into the actual slurry itself. You can obviously use the mallet then to push that down, and literally, that is literally it. You do not need to do anything else because everything is actually wet on wet. Everything will dry in one way. And what's more important with this system is you can start the grouting and walking on literally 12 hours later. Even at 25 mil. It's a rapid drying system. So you don't get the shrinkage, and it gives you the ability to be able to actually grout up shortly afterwards. Now, you're not going to always complete the project in one go. So you may end up doing a section of the floor, and then you finish for that day, and then you come back the following day. When you come back the following day, what you do is you cut off up to the edge of the porcelain you've just laid. Strike a straight score where the joint is. Remove any remaining sort of drainage as far as the bedding mortar on top from the floor itself. And literally the following day, when you come back, when you're going to start to use the priming slurry bond onto the next part that you're going to start and carry on working, slurry bond the actual edge of the actual bedding mortar so that when you compact that bedding mortar on top of the wet slurry, it's also joining up with the actual mortar that you applied the day before. If you pull that porcelain up now, the mortar will actually stick to the back and will come with it. Important with the mix itself, the bedding mortar should be a semi-dry mix. You only need 2 litres of water, and that's also another element. With normal traditional sand cement, you would need a lot more water. And with this, you only need 2 litres, so it helps with regards to less shrinkage, dries a lot quicker, and also allows the actual fixing of the porcelain straight afterwards.
Dave, 2 questions. What would you, what if you needed wedges to get the tiles level?
But this is where the difference with things like clip systems that we have currently with obviously big format tiles, because it's actually a bedding mortar that you're putting down, wet, is that if there's actually a slight inconsistency in thickness or whatever the case may be, you can use then a mallet and beat it down to actually get your levels. The difference is with clip systems, it's obviously because using the adhesives where they're quite, the design where they would grab, you need something which you can't lift these things up. This, you can actually knock the actual material into the bedding mortar and literally create your flat surfaces. You need, though, the joint widths need to be at least a minimum of 3mm joints.
Another one from Niall in Ireland. What's the benefits of using the external bedding mortar with the slurry bond opposed to using basic sand and cement mix?
Basically, as far as I sort of touched on this not too long ago, but if you imagine on site, you've got your bags of cement, you've got your bags of sand, you wouldn't be able to mix all that material to form that consistent mix. You would obviously only have so much that you can mix up at a time, and therefore what you would do is and nobody has measuring scales, so it's usually the shovel that gives you the idea as far as sand versus cement, or if it comes in bags, but most of the time they have it in ton bags. What you would do is, if you mix that up from one mix to the next, you might find that certain mixes had more sand in and less cement, or more cement and less sand. So you're not getting the right consistency, and therefore with cement generally you can get issues with shrinkage, and that is the big one with this. The beauty about the BAL bedding mortar is it's a pre-blended with additives, cement, sand, all those, and also allowing the minimum thicknesses, which is what we want as well. So you're putting minimum amounts on and using the MOT to actually build up.
Is there a maximum bay size before expansion joints are required?
With regards to expansion joints, we should always follow industry standards. With regards to landscaping, and you've got all these associations with regards to, and including the actual tile association standards as well. So just put the moving joints obviously in the recommended sort of areas at the time.
And this specific system has been designed for a porcelain, hasn't it?
It's been designed for porcelain, but it's not. You've got to remember, as far as 20mm porcelain is the standard, 20mm we always refer to as a self-supporting material because it's 20mm thick. You might get some that are actually 18 that also are self-supporting. They also could be used with this system. The only time the bedding mortar system with the priming slurry bond is if you go to tiles that are not self-supporting, and we're talking about things like 10mm and other things like that. So as long as the material you're using being a paver or a porcelain or whatever it's actually using, and it's suitable for external use, as long as it's self-supporting, you can actually use this method of bedding mortar and slurry bonding coat between the actual porcelain or material and the bedding mortar. So, just to clarify, obviously, the end of the day with this is set up your areas. The important bit, just to recap, put your rails down, or whatever method you want to use to form your falls. If you don't want to use laths and you want to do freehand, that is also fine. But set out your areas, how you're going to do it. Set out your falls. Make sure that their falls are correct and moving away from the building or to any, obviously, drainage points. When you do that, I would mix up some of the primary slurry bond, paint that onto the areas, bedding mortar, and put your timber laths into place at set sizes across to actually form your rules. Once you've done that, then you can actually get started by mixing fill in between with the priming slurry bond, tip your actually bedding mortar, compact it down, rule it off your edges and install the tiles. And that is all you need to do. And literally, the only key thing that, afterwards is when you finish that day, just make sure you cut along where the edge of the porcelain or material you're using, clear away, and then the following morning you start exactly like you did before, but also the only difference is you just slurry the edge of the bedding mortar that you laid the previous day.
Dave, another question. Can you use a bedding mortar as a pedestal on self-supporting 20mm porcelain?
The whole point with this system is you don't need to have self-supporting anyway, so this actually provides the actual ability to actually physically fill and go on. Now, if you've got little pads that you're actually putting onto the actual floor and you want to infill that up to the same height, that is also fine. If you're using that as a means of your falls and levels and then infill in between, that is also fine.
What grout would you recommend with this system, Dave?
The grout that we recommend, we actually, to complete this, because obviously everything has been tested in harmony with each other, we actually do a product called Terrace grout. This is actually a unique specialist grout that is designed for external use. It will go anywhere up to 15mm, and also we've picked the right colours that you would tend to use with the external sort of materials that you're coming up against. And it comes in 4 colours, ranging from the likes of your black, but also comes in a dark grey, a light grey, and also a beige as well. The material itself is very smooth, which also helps, and the formulation, because we talk about 20mm or very thick materials like pavers, we all know when grouting, it's quite difficult to grout those type of materials, because you're likely that you grout over the top and not fully fill and compact those joints. Therefore, this formulation allows that the grout will actually go into the joint fully compact. Yes, you still have to push into the joints to make sure you get the compaction, but it will compact a lot easier than normal grouts. Also, this is a 24-hour set, and this also allows the ability that you can grout larger areas. Again, rule applies with any type of modified material, is that you need to make sure the grout joints are firmed up before you start washing off, and that could take anything, we say the common 15 minutes, but it will all depend upon temperature, joint width and depth. But as soon as the grout is firmed up, you can then wash off the face of tiles and then also wring the sponge out to finish off and smooth out the joints. Also, just a note, even though porcelain it's quite impervious, you're not always going to have impervious surfaces. So if you do come across situations or you've got some concern that the tile may potentially stain, if you're using things like darker colour grouts like your blacks and your dark greys, it's always good to do a test area first. And if it does stain, we do a product called BAL Protective Sealant, which is a wax emulsion that you can apply over the actual face of tiles. Care must be taken, you don't get it in the joints of course, because it's designed as a temporary sealant so the grout doesn't actually adhere to the material, to the face. We don't want that else to happen in the joints. Once you apply the protective sealant, more than one coat may be required, depending on the porosity of the material, but there, once it's actually been applied and dried, which takes around about 15 minutes to half an hour, depending on temperature, and you just use a cloth over the face. You grout up with a terrace grout, and you can wash off the grout in the normal way, but what's beautiful about this, it actually will remove the protective sealant, so the grout is actually not sticking to the surface, which one, helps for ease of clean, if you've got more of a textured finish, but also two, is then it actually stops the actual material from staining itself.
2 questions, Dave, then. Firstly, is the grout like a slurry grout or more like a traditional grout? It's more like a traditional grout. The water ratio for a 10 kilo bag is around about 2.3 litres. So the material itself is more of a traditional grout. You don't mix it up very stiff as you wouldn't do with normal grouts.
But by putting that sort of amount of water in, it's very much like a traditional grout, but because it's super smooth, it actually helps to compact into those sort of thick porcelain tiles as well.
I've got a question from Clark who's asked, can you not put a solid concrete base down, DPM, and then use pourable one or rapid flex? I think that's what he's asked.
Yeah, of course it goes back to, I mean, this is obviously the whole purpose of these exercises, which is why we have the traditional level out over your floor where you've got a concrete base, because concrete base is not normally always prepared flat. So you use the level out external BAL leveler over the surface, and then that can actually be tiled in the traditional sort of manner. But also, like my own garden, it's not concrete. It's got pavers on, and it's got gravel and things like that. So this actually aids in if you don't want to put a concrete base in, because if you ever want to change your mind in the future, removing concrete is obviously quite difficult and a time issue. At least with obviously using a type 1, it's a lot easier to change if the landscape of the garden in the future, if that's the case. But it's a lot quicker because you haven't got to wait 6 weeks for a concrete base to dry before you go down the traditional route. But if it's obviously driveways where you're putting cars on, then we would still encourage the use of a concrete base to be used in that type of application.
What's the time difference, Dave, then between a concrete base putting down for tiles and this and the bedding mortar system again?
Concrete base, you're looking at 6 weeks, which is obviously industry sort of standards type of thing, but obviously it can depend also on thickness and temperature, of course. The beauty about with this system, you can tomorrow order your MOT, whack a plate down and start timing. That is the difference. There's no wait. You can literally start as soon as you want to. Once you've actually put the MOT down, compact it down, whack a plate down, make sure it's fully compacted, damp down the actual MOT if it's quite porous, apply the slurry bond primer onto the actual surface, bedding mortar, compact that down, slurry the top, and fix your tile, and then tiles and towels.
That's it. If we haven't had any more questions, I'll give people maybe another couple of minutes, shall we, Dave, just to get some questions in.
So the thing is, you may look at this is actually quite different to tiling. These systems that we're doing here is really traditionally how tilers used to work 30, 40, 50 years ago. This was the method of fixing tiles and beyond, before then. Tile fixers used to actually screed and render. In this case, they screed the floor. The simple thing is, once you've actually got your rules and you string lines to actually join up to get your levels, and all you do is fill in between some laths. And the important bit here is you just use 2 litres of water per 25 kilo bag of the bedding mortar, and you've got every bag, every mix is consistent. And the simple check is if you do a ball of your hand, and it all holds together, then you know it's right, because when you compact it, it will all come together. It hasn't got to be overly wet, and we encourage you not to, because that will affect shrinkage as well as obviously drying process as well. So keep it semi-dry, do a ball with your hand, and literally then you know exactly what you need.
Okay, is the system subject to tiling standards or paving standards?
This is actually in relation to paving standards, because obviously if you're going down the actual concrete route, then you will go down the tile standards, because it's exactly the same indoor and out. We're using things like MOT, and actually it's more to do with paving standards, landscapers use methodology like that. That's the method that we would recommend in this particular case.
And just had a question from Darren about the working time in the bedding mortar. I think it said an hour.
It's an hour, yeah, 60 minutes. So you've got ample time. Trust me, you can't mix the material itself once you get started, and that's why the force action mixers are ideal, because you can tip everything in, tip your water, and leave it while you're using the material. So it's mixing in the background, so you've got constant amount of material, so you haven't got to keep stopping.
Brilliant, Dave. Well, I think that's all the questions we've got so far.
Right, so thank you very much. If you're still on, obviously say hi, and obviously if there's any more questions, but feel free, you've got a couple of minutes. Also, go back on the chat list, chat itself. You'll see a link on there. Go onto that link, register your actual job that you're going to do outside, externally, and you win a chance of actually the different systems being level out if you go into concrete base, or the bedding mortar with the slurry and grouts to actually physically install your tiles in with, you talk about 20 porcelain. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you, bye-bye.